Okay, good evening. I am delighted to be here. I'm both here and online here. And I have been working on this program for 3 or 4 years. Did it first during the pandemic, when all I really had to go on was Parker Albie's book, Letters from Sea, and my own experience as a shanty singer for about 45 years. And I had no idea that there was so much to learn about Joanna Colcord, which I would now like to share with you. But thing to know is she was fundamentally a blue water sailor out of sight of land. And the first thing we're going to do is take a sail with her where she traveled on a trip when she was 15 and went around the world. This was not at all unusual for her. It wasn't the first time or the last that she went around the world. I'll sing you a song, a good song of the sea. Hey, Ryan, I'll sing you a song if you'll sing it with me, and we're bound for the Rio Grande. And it's away, Rio, away, Rio, and fare ye well, my pretty young girls, and we're bound for the Rio Grande. Our good ship went sailing out over the bar. Away, Rio, we pointed her bound to the Southern Star, and we're bound for the Rio Grande. And it's away, Rio, away, Rio, and fare ye well, my pretty young girls. We're bound for the Rio Grande. Way up! And that was a journey that she took with her family. And I was amazed to find that she went not only around the Horn, up to over across the Columbia Bar. Her mother became very ill at the time and was not able to go home by sea. So at 15, Joanna took her younger brother Lincoln and her ill mother home on the, by then, only 15 years old Canadian Pacific Railway, all the way across Canada. And really thought nothing of it. She has some commentary about it in her childhood at sea, about this was pretty much what they were used to do. So in this group of people, you are surrounded, if you are here in the Penobscot Marine Museum, there's a wonderful exhibit which we're sitting in the middle of called Faithfully Yours, Joanna Colcord. But what I'd like to talk about tonight was, who was she as a collector? What networks did she have? What were some of her achievements and struggles? What did she do? And how did she do it? And where can we put her in context as a collector in the, from the time of the women's suffrage movement to the golden age of radio between the First and Second World Wars? So we can talk about her collection today at the end as well. But first, it's important to know that her network started with Joanna being 5th generation here in Searsport. And her mother, I understand, was also raised at sea. And the Sweetser Inn, just down the street here, is a family bed and breakfast that was a captain's home from the area. And the night of their wedding, they took off on a 3-year honeymoon voyage that was going to bring them home with 2 children. This was just the way things were done in Searsport, Maine in the 1880s. And they visited so many ports, it was really difficult to name, but Joanna was born off the, in the South China Sea, off of Caledonia. And you can see that here we've got some of her voyages that the family made. If you go to my website, you can actually click through to this and look and see which voyages were made with Joanna and which were made without her. You can see that Canadian Pacific Railway across the top there. And what I find interesting is that they didn't spend a lot of time in the North Atlantic. They were really not doing part of the merchant marine in Europe. They were mostly focused on the China trade, round the Horn or round the Cape of Good Hope and all the way to Hong Kong and ports in China. And of course, Joanna made her high school diploma from Hong Kong. But her first trip, you had Rio at the beginning, Rio Grande. The first trip she made at the age of 8 was down the Rio Plata and up into the interior for lumber. And there she is on the deck.
What country is that?
Sorry, Argentina. Rosario, so into the interior of Argentina, at the little port of Rosario. And her friend Cicely Fox Smith, who was a wonderful writer and collector in her own right, talks about wake her and shake her, and it's goodbye to the shore, with the north wind in her topsails and the whole wide world before. It's a long road to travel to Rosario. And this is a model of the bark Harvard that she spent a lot of time in her childhood on, and she can still recall the thrill of hearing the crew of a British ship lying beside us in Shanghai, singing the old shanty, "Goodbye, fare you well, goodbye, fare you well," as they heaved up anchor, and comprehending for the first time that this was beautiful and distinctive music. So she really got the feel and the taste of shanties at a very young age. And the following examples, she says, of the work songs are drawn in part from her own memories. And so she was her own informant. She learned a lot of them from her father and from his captains and his friends. And we often talk about how captains' wives and children were not necessarily supposed to spend a lot of time with ordinary sailors. But Joanna clearly did. And she had these songs and she took them down from the lips, she says, of many sailormen, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So she was really steeped in this music of the sea, and she doesn't necessarily mention women informants, but I love this picture because there's a woman with her hand on the tiller. And it's one of the small vessels that would cruise around Hong Kong harbor. I'm going to go back to that one, so that the kids, Joanna and Lincoln, as children, would be given the freedom of the harbor to hop into any one of these little boats and tool around with folks who were running these little junks or small harbor vessels. And the younger boy looks a little dubious at the camera, but I think we're seeing a smile on Mama's face, and I love that. Right. This happens to be a fairly dark picture, okay. But I can also tell you that the whole site, the whole program is also available on my website. Not that it does you any good now, but if you want to go and look at the slides, they're on joannacolcord.com. So Joanna published 3 collections. 2 of Roll and Go is the centennial of her. This year is the centennial of her first book, Roll and Go. And I'm really pleased to be here as a part of the centennial celebrations at the museum. Yay, Penobscot Marine Museum for celebrating that. And then in 1938, an expanded edition called Songs of American Sailormen. And then a third book of, which has a place of honor in the throne at our house, called Gangway, Sea Language Comes Ashore, which is a wonderful little snippet reading of all of the little phrases like weathering a storm, or being 3 sheets to the wind, or any of those little things that we don't really necessarily think about being part of seafaring language anymore. But she's collected a whole book of seafaring language, and those books are over in the corner for those of you that are here at the museum. And for those that are on the online on Zoom, again, joannacolcord.com is the site where you've got links to both those books as digital editions. So Joanna knew her seamanship, and she organized the books not geographically, not alphabetically, not thematically, but by function. So she put all of the shanties that did a particular job of work together, and really were able to illustrate by that what kinds of work were done. And Gordon Grant has done a wonderful job of these illustrations that are in Roll and Go. We had Boney earlier today, but for the folks on Zoom, I want to talk a little bit about what a short drag shanty is, because it's beautifully illustrated here. The shantyman is what's called sweating up. And in the last few pulls, when the sail is very heavy, Sandy knows this as a sailor, that you really have to give it some gas to get those last few pulls, to get on a schooner. You want the peak of the sail all the way high up. And so what you do is you take the sheet and you push and then pull and then reach up and hang on it with all your weight. And that's what the shantyman is doing, while down at the bottom, the crew is what's called tallying on, and they are hauling on the rope that is being loosened up by the shantyman sweating it up. So if you listen to the rhythm of Boney Was a Warrior, which is about Napoleon Bonaparte, you'll hear Boney was a warrior, way ya, a warrior, a terrier, Jean-Francois. Boney went to Moscow, way ya, and there he got his overthrow, Jean-Francois. Boney fought the Russians, way ya, and then he fought the Prussians, Jean-Francois. Boney went to Elbow, way ya, and Boney he came back again, Jean-Francois. So we'll do just a little bit of each of these so we can keep going. But Haul Away Joe and Haul on the Bowline are two other short drag shanties that we'll come back to when we get a chance to sing some more at the end of the program. But I want to make sure that folks on Zoom don't feel too left out, so I want to keep going here. But we're going to have a little sing at the end of the program. Now, here again, we've got a wonderful illustration of halyard shanties, hauling on the halyards, so that the motion you'll see is one long pull and two hands over, and one pull again and two hands over, and another pull. Sometimes you'll hear a double pull in one of the shanties. Sometimes you'll hear a single pull on the rope. And Below the Man Down is the first one. I love this one. Now then, are you sailors? Or are you corpses? Or what are you? Ain't there a shantyman among the whole blame lot of you? So that's my question to you. I'm a flying fish sailor just back from Hong Kong. Tell me, way, blow the man down. Give me some whiskey, I'll sing you a song. Give me some time to blow the man down. As I was a-walking down Paradise Street. Tell me, way, blow the man down. A Liverpool Bobby I chanced for to meet. Give me some time to blow the man down. Says he, you're a black baller by the captain of your hand. Tell me, way, blow the man down. I'm sorry, I got distracted by hauling and pulling at the same time. You're a black baller by the clothes that you wear. Give me some time to blow the man down. And that's all we're going to do with that one, so that we can keep moving along. But there's a longer and a slower version of a halyard shanty in this next one, Shallow Brown, that Captain Robinson says remembers hearing it sung by a black crew of an American full-rigged ship. at the Guano Islands in the South Pacific, where it sounded very musical coming across the water. So here again, you're going to hear that. Fare you well now, Juliana, shallow, shallow brown, and you know I'm bound to leave you, shallow, shallow brown. The packet sails tomorrow, shallow, shallow brown. I'm off across the border, shallow, shallow brown. So fare you well now, Juliana, shallow, shallow brown. You know I'm bound to leave you, shallow, shallow brown. I want to talk about a third one, poor old man, or sometimes called poor old horse. Well, I'll be hornswoggled. Look who drove down.
How do you do?
Hey, it's Bennett Konechny. We're glad to see you. That's great. Well, we're just about to do Poor Old Horse.
Great.
And this is a wonderful ritual shanty on British ships. Joanna says she never saw the custom done on American ships, where it was used for halyards and sometimes for capstan. But the custom is that if you got your 2 months advance, you often had to spend it on your kit and sometimes in the pub or to the crimp before you had to go out to sea. So you were working off the dead horse, as they say, and in order to get square and get to the point where you were making money on the voyage, on the day that you started making money, on the beginning of that third month or whenever it was, then the sailors would take one of their straw mattresses and actually make a horse effigy out of it and hoist it up the yardarm and lower him down and chuck him overboard and sing this song. And I sang it on the day that I paid off my student loans. They say, oh man, your horse will die, and they say so, and we hope so. They say, oh man, your horse will die, oh poor old man. He's dead as a nail in the lamp room door, and they say so, and we hope so, and he won't be worrying us no more, oh poor old man. We'll hoist him up to the main yard arm, and they say so, and they hope so. We'll hoist him up to the main yard arm, oh poor old man. There you go. So that's the dead horse shanty, or poor old man. Yeah, question.
Crimper.
What's a crimp?
Crimp. Yeah.
A crimp is a landlord who took all your money and then sent you to sea 2 months in arrears. So, not a good guy. We're going to move on to the capstan and windlass shanties. For those that were here this afternoon for our great shanty sing with Stephen Sanfilippo, spent a lot of time on capstan and windlass shanties, and the motions of those. They're either taking the capstan bars and get your gut right up against the capstan bar and shove, and as you go around, the pawls will clink and the gears will catch as you go around the capstan. And so there's a motion like this and a motion like that for a capstan shanty, a similar feeling but an up and down rhythm at the top of the windlass, down to about gut height again, and then down to the bottom and up to waist height, and then all the way up. So we've had Rio Grande. Let's have the codfish shanty. And I have a shameless plug for those of you here that the codfish shanty, or Cape Cod Girls, is actually on one of my CDs, which is over there on the table. And for those of you that are interested, there are links to my Bandcamp page. on joannacolcord.com. Cape Cod girls don't use no combs. Heave away, haul away. They comb their hair with the codfish bones and bound away for Australia. So heave her up, my bully, bully boys. Heave away, haul away. Heave her up and don't you make a noise, 'cause we're bound away for Australia. And Cape Cod cats don't have no tails. Heave away, haul away. They lost them all in the northeast gales and bound away for Australia. So heave her up, my bully, bully boys. Heave away, haul away. Heave her up and don't you make a noise, 'cause we're bound away for Australia. Well, just a couple of verses there. And you heard the hitch there, that big yelp. Joanna talks in the text of the book about the wild shrieks and yelps that came from the shantymen during their singing, and the notes would swoop like a bird, and there was nothing could be describing the quality of the shantyman's voice. And so I would urge you to read the text of Roll and Go and hear what she has to say about the wonderful verses and the character of the shantyman's voice. And One More Day is another good homeward bounder, which we'll sing on our sing session.
So the capstan and windlass both function to bring up the anchor.
And the windlass also functions at the pumps. Yeah. But both of them could be used for the anchor or doing any really heavy work. You could wrap a chain around, and it was something that was mechanically an aid to a sailor who couldn't necessarily do the work with a rope, with a sheet or a yard. Sorry, yard is the standing rigging. So we had a little bit of the folksel songs, again from Stephen, and I love this picture of the crew gathered around. I love to imagine little Joanna as a stealthy participant in the folksel. And I have no idea why these slides are advancing on their own, but when I go back, they stay, so I'm going to stick with that. Being from Boston, I have to give you 3 Boston folksel songs. We're not going to sing them all right now, but we'll give you a little bit of Blow You Winds in the Morning. Blow You Winds Hi-O. That's a chorus that you can sing. 'Tis advertised in Boston, New York, and Buffalo, 500 brave Americans a-wailing for to go, singing, blow your winds in the morning, blow your winds hi-ho, clear away your running gear and blow, boys, blow. Now we're out to sea, my boys, the wind comes on to blow. One half the watch is sick on deck, and the other half below, singing, blow your winds in the morning, blow your winds hi-ho, clear away your running gear and blow, boys, blow. Look out in the cross-tree stood a squinting at the sails, and there across the sea spies a mighty school of whales, singing, blow your winds in the morning, blow your winds hi-ho, clear away your running gear and blow, boys, blow. So that's a little bit of Boston Harbor, Blow Your Winds. Boston from Boston Harbor we'll sing during the sing-around. And that's another one that's actually on my CD, as is the Constitution and the Guerriere, me being from Boston and all. So I want to talk a little bit about the music because one of the questions that comes up as we discuss these things among us ourselves as shanty folk is who did the musical notation? And I finally got the answer, which is a letter that Gina sent me. That's from the in the museum's collection. I have had to teach myself musical notation really since last April, or at least enough to get by with. So she actually did all of the notation. The musical notation of the airs printed, come on, only feebly portrays the effects gained by real shanty singers. Here's that quote I was going to talk about. A good shantyman embellished the bare bones of the air with grace notes and flourishes. He flung his voice aloft like a bird to reach a high note, soaring above it, then swooping down upon it with an effortless precision, a careless, jubilant swoop and swing that was irresistible. Untaught and without rules except those of custom, he could perform feats of vocalization which were a sheer joy to the listener. And I think there's another shantyman in the room here. Bennett, I think you and I both aspire to that, yes?
Oh, yeah.
You know it. We all, this is the statement of what a shantyman is supposed to be that we all aspire to. And here again, I can only say, says Joanna, that the airs stand here as they were sung on board an American ship in the latter part of the 19th century. That's what makes her such an important collector. That she was so laser focused on songs of American sailormen. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. And one of my contributions to the scholarship around Joanna Colcord is that while I was waiting for my hip to be replaced this spring, I couldn't get around very much. So I spent my time transcribing the Colcord collection, note for note, from the text for those that are interested in learning what Joanna heard, but don't necessarily read musical notation. So this is a resource that's available to all of you. It's a zip file on my website that if you download it, it's going to have the ABC notation and the MIDI files that you can play on a computer, and also the MP3 files that will play on the web. And so if you want to listen exactly to what was notated at the time. Now, Stephen absolutely says, and I know Bennett will say as well, that what was sung at one time was not necessarily what was going to be sung 3 hours later. But for a point-in-time snapshot, really like a camera of what was sung at the time, we have this notation. And some things that I learned from that are most tunes are hand notated, and the later tunes from other sources are in printed notation. So Joanna's actually published some of her own handwritten material here. And really short staff lines, and she doesn't set them all in piano playable keys. There's a broad mix of natural keys, sharp keys, flat keys. Most of them are singable by an alto or a tenor. So it's really interesting that these are set as singer's keys where she's transcribed it. And there are chords given for every song, but I learned from John Roberts at the last Sea Music Symposium that those chords were added by the publisher, and they should really be treated as very suspect. So most of the chord work was not done by Joanna herself. It was typical in the 30s and 40s for a publisher to add chords to something that was going to be played as part of the folk revival. Yeah, question.
Did she do her collecting and publishing at the same time as this music was still alive, or was it after it was sort of had its demise that she went back and tried to preserve what she could?
So the death of sea shanties has been much lamented for 150 years. Many people would put the death of the age of sail at 1850 or 1860. Joanna would say that in around 1900, when her father went into steam, was the end of the shanty period. A.L. Lloyd and Stan Hugill in the 50s and 60s say, Stan Hugill in the 60s said he himself was the last shantyman because he was the last that shantied aboard British ships. So I would put the death of the work song somewhere between 1900 at the beginning of steam and the tail end of the working ships in 1940. Right about the time Joanna was publishing in 1924, Roll and Go, and 1938, Songs of American Sailormen. She was very much in touch with sailors who had these songs in living memory and learned a number of them from her father and from sailors in sailors' homes. So she was within a generation of songs that were sung at sea. So long-winded answer, but that's what I'm here for.
Thanks.
So I wanted to take a moment to talk about what Joanna heard in the birth of a shanty. And I want you to imagine that she's on the west coast of Peru, that she is waiting with her mother and her brother on the Guano Islands for her father's ship to have its turn at the chutes to fill the ship with guano. And she's got 100 ships all lying side by side in the harbor waiting their turn at the chutes. And one of the ships is a German ship, and they're singing this. Turn the volume up. Es ritten drei Reiter vom Tore hinaus, hi. Es ritten drei Reiter vom Tore hinaus, hi. So it's a little bit of that. And I'm not going to be able to play the alternate of that from another shantyman lost to us, Barry Finn. Has recorded Stan Hugill's version of that. And if you all are from the museum staff, don't have a copy of another book that you need to have as well as Colcord, is Stan Hugill's Shanties from the Seven Seas, which cites her 55 times. But it's the book that a lot of us grew up with at Mystic Seaport and a number of other shanty festivals, which is where we learned a lot of what we did. But I wanted to just take you the as written right from Tore hinaus becomes to the Spanish Main we are bound away, so ho! To the Spanish Main we are bound away, so ho! To the Spanish Main we are bound away, where the swift bonitos and the dolphins do play. Hi-hee, 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 all right to come Tore, hi-hee. So that's how an American singer would have taken the melody from a German song, put his own verses to it, and the Spanish Main in this case is the west coast of South America, not the Spanish Main that you would think of in Europe, which was not at all where these songs were sung. So a little bit of interest about the how Joanna talks about the birth of a shanty. So let's talk a little bit more about Joanna as an adult. She entered the University of Maine in 1902 and earned her BS in chemistry, cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. She was a sharp cookie, and went on to earn her master's in biochem from the University of Maine in 1909. But they were restless and dissatisfied years. I saw little future for a woman in applied science. And though I began to realize I was more interested in people and things, I did not think I liked teaching. So she minored in German, and as those of you can see on the wall, that her German professor actually went into social work himself and suggested that she follow him. And so she continued in that career and really made a wonderful career for herself. Her career in social work spanned the Great Depression, the New Deal era, and into the war years. She published a number of books on emergency work relief was one of her books, and one on broken homes, which she certainly was familiar with from all of the sailors who had left families behind, either intentionally or unintentionally. And her specialty was social service, but her heart was always in this very maritime milieu, such that as the director of the Russell Sage Foundation, they wrote of her experience with gales and hurricanes and the need to change course in heavy weather was a useful background for piloting her department through a tumultuous 15 years. And I think many of us can appreciate that. She married very late in life. At the age of 68, she married Frank Bruno, who was then 74. His wife had died 6 months earlier, and they had been friends for many, many years. I love this quote. She says, "Frank was my guiding light, the summer of my heart, ever since I first met him years ago." So they finally had an opportunity to marry toward the end of their lives. He lived for 5 years after that. And you can see that she's buried as Joanna Colcord Bruno. She survived him for another 5 years and died 3 months after I was born. So I never had a chance to meet her. Very sad. But let's put her in context here. For those of you that are new to the world of sea music collecting, it is a deep niche. I invite you to dive into the Mariana Trench with the sea music and spend your time with us and learn from us. We have much to teach you. But some of the important names to know are W.B. Whall, Cecil Sharp, Laura Alexandrine Smith, and John Masefield, all of whom are English collectors of sea music. She was a peer of John Masefield. She drew upon Whall and Sharp and L.A. Smith. She was also a peer and a close friend of Cicely Fox-Smith, whose work has been collected by Charlie Ipcar of Maine, a great big thick book of Cicely Fox-Smith's work, much of which I've set along with a number of other people. And Stan Hugill published his seminal work of Chanteys of the Seven Seas, and as I said, he quoted her 55 times. I love Search. Search is great. And Stan Hugill is the one that many of us in this generation have as a touchstone for being the guy. He was a very performative shantyman, and you'll hear him really referred to as a legend, both in his own time and beyond. And Stan Hugill paid the highest possible compliment to Joanna Colcord, who said, "Miss Colcord is a woman, but a regular seaman, if ever there was one." So there. And I love this picture. Many people do. It's a picture of her father. And it's really the portrait of the singing sailor. There's a long quote, which I can't get to from where I can see on this screen, which I don't have memorized, but we have to say farewell to the singing sailor. Around 1900, Captain Colcord left his last command and went into steam. And Joanna says, "Steam asks no help from song." So one of the things that is important also to know is that the corporate world of the steamships meant that the men who captained them and were their officers were not also part owners of the vessel. And so there was no room for wives and families aboard these steam-powered vessels. So that meant the end of a way of life for Joanna's mother, for her brother, Lincoln, who was not going to follow in his father's footsteps and go to sea. It was really the end for a whole group of people whose lives had been spent on the ocean. And so farewell at last to the singing sailor. And I have to tell the story that the captain's wife was the only one who didn't like this picture because she didn't have his teeth in. So that's the little secret of this picture. I was very interested to know what was still lurking in the depths of Roll and Go that nobody had recorded, that maybe I could find some magical, amazing shanty that nobody had yet taken off the page, and I was going to be able to find myself a fabulous new piece. And so, of course, I did what anybody today would do, which is that I made a Spotify playlist. I was amazed to find that all but 20 of the songs in Songs of American Sailormen, not just Roll and Go, are still out there, being sung, being recorded, are still on Spotify. And the ones that are not there are there because the artists themselves are on Spotify. There's been a lot of recording done of people who are, gee, I can't imagine why, not on a streaming service. And there are some with some really problematic lyrics. There are racist lyrics, there are sexist lyrics, there are songs about interracial marriage. There are extremely gory wailing songs. I will call out Andrew Rose, for those of you who may have encountered Andrew Rose, who is flogged and beaten and having to go on a long whaling voyage. And it's a horrifically violent and gory ballad. And I have no intention of learning it whatsoever. Although I know a lot of really gory whaling ballads. I draw the line at Andrew Rose. But this is, if you are interested in learning the Colcord collection and just having a listen while you're driving in the car to what's out there, that's something that's a resource available to you on the site. But I wanted to talk at the last about women in shanty singing. And Joanna was prepared, like W.B. Whall, like L.A. Smith, like C. Fox Smith, to publish under her initials. And her brother took her to task and said, now I sit me down to complain of your decision and your arguments as to where your name is to stand on the title page. Neither are worthy of you, Nan. You deliberately propose to dodge your sex for obscure psychological reasons. Not a reason that you give will hold water for a minute. There is no objection at all to having a woman collect a volume of sea poetry. No reader would raise a question about it for a moment. There is no objection to a woman's having been to sea. It only adds to the interest of the occasion. Here is something new, a real sailor woman. You have a good right to your sailor knowledge, and I'm proud of it whenever I think of you. You ought to glory in it and make all the capital there is of it. Rah, rah, go Lincoln Colcord, way to be an ally. And so I would ask you, if you are here with me today or even on Zoom, say it with me. There is no objection to a woman's having been to sea. It only adds to the interest of the occasion. I'm having that on a t-shirt. It just isn't done yet. Because this is the Flying Cloud with a woman navigator, Eleanor Creasy, broke the record round the Horn to San Francisco in 1847 and beat her own record in 1849 of a record that stood until 1989. Wow. Yeah. So there is no objection to a woman's having been to sea, and I thank you for adding to the interest of the occasion with me. So much appreciated there. And so happy centennial to Roll and Go. Yes, I will get there. I promise. You can clap soon. Happy centennial to Roll and Go. I have had the wonderful opportunity of putting together a little centennial tour. I was most recently at the Connecticut Museum's, the Connecticut Symposium on the Music of the Sea at the Sea Music Festival. I'm going to do a number of other presentations over the summer, and this program is going to the American Folklore Society in Albuquerque, New Mexico in November. So if you have questions, I will take a look in the chat. Thank you.